maybe 4th and change.
Okay, welcome. It is December 6th,
To go for
7:05 PM, and this is our main session of City Council. I'd just like to take a minute and excuse Mayor Wilkinson and Councilman McEwen. We also have several on Zoom participating this evening. We'll begin with a roll call vote, starting with Councilman Ince.
Present.
Summer Hayes present.
Hurst, present.
Meekum present.
Do we have anyone else online, Jennifer, that's gonna?
Just Brent and Nate.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, Councilman Summerhays, do you want to do legislative thought or prayer?
I am the least of a wordsmith, but just my thought tonight is we had our city Christmas party last night. It was extremely well attended. I know that Bryce is concerned that we didn't even have all of our city employees there, and we're already almost at capacity where we were. So if we had had everyone there with their +1, we wouldn't have fit there, which is a good problem to have. We want to celebrate all the great work that our city staff provides to our residents. But I think for me, it was a good reminder of how great a staff we have across the board in all departments. And my thought is more of a express appreciation for all the great work that people do in this city for us, who are sometimes members of our community and otherwise not, but are extremely vested in our well-being as Centerville residents. That's my thought.
Thank you. Okay, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. We will now have an open session. This is an opportunity for members of our public to make comments or suggestions. If we have anyone who would like to comment, if you'll keep your comments brief, 3 minutes or less. And then if you can state your name and city of residence for the record. Nobody online? Okay, it appears that we do not have any comments, so we'll move on to the presentations. Is Nate online?
Yes.
Okay. Nate, we'll turn the time over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Good evening, Council. Tonight we have before you the presentation of the fiscal year 22 independent auditors report and the presentation of our annual financial report. We have hopefully John Hatterley with Larson and Company. He's the partner with our independent auditing firm. He's here to present to you his findings on the audit. And so before I turn it over to him, though, I'd just like to note that we met as an audit committee and reviewed his findings and the audit report. And it was unanimously accepted by the audit committee on November 22nd with the recommendation to move it forward to council. And lastly, I'd just like to thank John and his staff for their professionalism, as well as the finance department and Marcus Arbuckle and his staff for all the work that they put into this. This was months and months of hard work compiling this. And so anyway, I appreciate all the hard work that was put into it by our staff. So with that, I turn the time over to John and let him present and answer any questions you have.
Nate's just excited I'm here. He would have felt kind of foolish online with me not being here. All right. I'll just run over our opinions first, a couple of the reports, and then the things that we're required to communicate to you. But first, like Nate said, I also want to express my gratitude to your staff. So Pat, Nate on the back, Brant, and Marcus, because they did put a lot of work into it. I got good reports from my staff that all the information that we requested was given to us almost immediately, which I, as a partner, really like to hear. If I have staff coming to me saying, hey, we're trying to get this stuff, we need to get it wrapped up, and we're still not getting the information, and then I have to reach out, my risk hairs kind of start standing up saying, okay, well, why can't you get us this information? Are you trying to recreate the information? You don't have the information, you're not keeping documentation. But none of that happened. So I just want to thank the staff. They're great staff and they're great to work with. All right, so the audit report is what we're going to go over first. And it is immediately following the introductory section of the aquifer. I hate that term. I think I should just say the whole thing, the annual financial report now, since they changed the name. It did change, so the format of the audit report has changed. Everybody felt like the opinion was the most important part of the audit report, so now it's very first rather than being later on in the report. So our opinion is that the financial statements are presented fairly in all material respects. So that is an unqualified or an unmodified opinion or a clean opinion. And the basis for our opinions is we are required to follow both generally accepted auditing standards as well as government auditing standards, and there are differences between those. And so that is what guides us kind of through our audit. We have to follow those policies and procedures. Your responsibility for the financial statements really are that the financial statements themselves, but knowing and understanding the accounting principles and how to apply them, keeping the financial records in a clean and a good order. A new paragraph in the audit report this year is if during the year or in preparation of the financial statements, if Nate and his staff or Marcus, Brent, anybody who's involved, if there's conditions or events that arise that would prohibit you from continuing as a going concern in the next 12 months, then the city's required to do an analysis to say, okay, we've identified these events or these conditions. What are we going to do to overcome that? Can we overcome that? And can we continue to operate as a city beyond 12 months? Our responsibility for the financial statements, and this is another new section of the audit report that we're required to outline now, and this has always been part of our audit procedures, but now it's a part of the audit report, is that we have to exercise professionalism and as well as professional skepticism. So to my staff, I explain to them that they have to trust but verify. So we know that Nate and his staff are trying to do what's right, and they're doing the best job they can. That doesn't mean that mistakes don't happen. So we don't want to come in, accusatory, saying, hey, we think that you're doing everything wrong, we're going to fix everything. We trust that you're doing it right, but our job is to verify what's been happening in the financial records. We also have to identify and assess risk, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So we have to understand also your internal controls. We make sure, A, that you have internal controls, and that B, they're actually functioning. It doesn't do you any good to have policies and procedures and to set internal controls if nobody's following them. So both of those items are things that we look at. We also evaluate how you're treating accounting principles and making sure that you're doing it right in the financial records. And then the last thing is that we also, in our test work, if there's events or conditions that we identify that would prohibit you from continuing as a going concern, then we have to do our own analysis as well based on the conditions that we know. And the first thing that we would do is ask for your analysis. A good example of that would be, we all went through COVID, and I hate that we now go back to COVID, right? That's the timeline that all of us go back to. But during that time period, there was a potential risk that cities or counties or private businesses would fail in the next upcoming 12 months because everybody was told to stay home, don't do anything. People are going to lose their jobs. So how would it affect the government? Well, if, for instance, everybody lost their job, they can't pay their property taxes, nobody goes to the store and buys anything, nobody buys fuel. So then all of a sudden your tax revenue, everything dries up. and you don't have the ability to continue to provide the governmental services. So that would be a condition or event that possibly could prevent you from continuing. And so analysis was done to say, okay, what are we gonna do? Are we actually gonna lose revenue? Turns out that really nobody in the state of Utah really lost revenue as far as governments go. So that was a good thing. But that's a good example. Requires supplementary information, so there is information contained in the financial statement package that does not follow under our opinion, and that is the management's discussion and analysis, and then immediately following the notes is a section called required supplementary information, and that contains the URS information, as well as some other information. So those are not part of the basic financial statements, but GASB says they have to always accompany the financial statements to give them more readability and more understandability. So what you need to take from that is that they are not audited sections. However, we do tie the numbers down. Supplementary information, so that's going to be the combining statements of your non-major funds. So you as a city have chosen to include those in your basic financial statements. Those do fall under our opinion. In the basic financial statements, they're all compressed into one column called other major, non-major governmental funds or other proprietary funds. But because they're non-major, they just get summed up into one column. But you've chosen to show so that the public can see everything in all of those funds. And then also on the introductory section and the statistical section, now as part of our audit procedures, we have to read the entire amount to make sure that there's no material inconsistencies contained in those sections. So we make sure that all the information contained in there is appropriate and that it ties back to the financial statements. All right. Okay, the next report that we're required to issue is our report that states that we've performed your audit in accordance with government auditing standards. I won't spend a lot of time on that. It says that we look at your internal controls, and our job is to identify material weaknesses or significant deficiencies if we find them. However, there weren't any, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that one. The next report is the report that we're required to issue for the state auditor. We do give an opinion on your compliance as it relates to specific sections of the code. That is the budget, your budgetary compliance, fund balance, justice courts, restricted taxes, fraud risk assessment, and government fees. So our opinion is very specific to those areas. So I always give the caveat that just because we looked at these areas and we say you don't have any findings or there's no material non-compliance, that doesn't excuse you from obeying the rest of Utah State Code. One of the things that we don't test anymore as part of state compliance is your deposit, the deposit rule. So you have to deposit any money within 3 days, 3 business days. We still incorporate that test into our audit because I feel like that actually pertains to your financial statements and getting money to the bank. So just because we don't test on it doesn't mean that you don't need to be in compliance with other code, but our opinion is very specific to those sections. I bring that up because I've had people call me and say, well, you said that we were in compliance and we didn't have any findings, but yet I know that we're not following this rule. And so I have to basically say, well, yes, that's probably true if you're not, but our opinion is very specific to the areas that we test. All right. Are you guys bored yet? Okay, a couple of things that we're required to go over at the conclusion of our audit. Our responsibility for the audit is to look at the financial statements. We look at your internal controls, and all of that is outlined and identified in the engagement letter. So that's a letter that is signed at the beginning of the audit. And then we get a management representation letter from the city at the end of the audit. And what that letter is kind of a full disclosure that any information that we should be made aware of, you've been forthcoming with that information, whether we've asked for it or, for example, if you're aware of litigation and you don't say anything to us, then potentially our opinion could be incorrect because there's a liability that needs to be booked in the notes of the financial statements. Or if you're aware of fraud that you don't make us aware of, that we can investigate further. So really just a full disclosure letter. We're required to communicate to you that it's my responsibility to make sure that both my team as well as my entire firm are independent of Centerville City, and that we also remain independent throughout the engagement, and that we also follow our ethical responsibilities of our profession. So that onus of responsibility doesn't fall on Nate. He doesn't need to be the one that makes sure that we're independent and that we're doing, our job the way we should. That's my job as a partner. Significant risks identified. So I said we were going to talk about risks, and I've been questioned on these the entire year because this is something new that we're required to talk to you guys about. But the significant risks that we identified as part of your audit was improper revenue recognition, cash disbursements, and then potential management bias or the ability to override controls. So what does that mean to the city? Well, our audits are all based on risk. So anytime we go into an engagement, whether it's a government, a nonprofit, for-profit, public company, we have to identify every significant area, and then we assign a risk to it. There are specific areas, such as revenue recognition, that is a significant risk in every engagement. It doesn't matter what type of entity you are. If we say, well, we think that Centerville City doesn't have that risk, then we actually have to perform additional procedures to document why you don't have that risk. So in our audit, what we do is we plan specific extended procedures around these three risks to make sure that those risks are not elevated. We have to reduce that risk. So for example, cash disbursements, this is a significant risk in most governments because you're dealing with public funds. So everybody's concerned on how you spend your money. So we actually do additional testing on your cash disbursements to make sure that money is being spent appropriately, money is being budgeted for, that there's not any misappropriations, that things like that. So it's additional procedures over and above what we normally would do in an audit to identify these specific risks. Did the city do anything to warrant these risks? No, not really, because you're just a normal government, if that makes sense. So don't get overly concerned that Nate's staff or that you guys did anything specific to warrant these. This is just things that we have to identify in our audit, and then we plan procedures around them to make sure that the risk is not significant. All right, we've talked about accounting principles, significant estimates. So just remember that there's estimates in the financial statements, and over time those estimates can change. Our job as auditors is to try to identify any estimates in the financial statements and make sure that they're reasonable and that the basis for allocating those estimates or balances is consistent over time. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So if you were to go buy, a big piece of equipment or something like that, and you say, well, we think that it's only going to last a year, and it's a $500,000 piece of equipment, so we're going to expense that $500,000. So let's just say that you have a break even in the water fund. You go buy a new truck and you expense $500,000. Well, now all of a sudden you have a $500,000 loss. But if you say, well, we think that truck's actually going to last 100 years, and we're going to allocate that over 100 years, now you only have a $5,000 loss, then that's a $450,000 change that just made your financial data go up, right? So we come in as the auditors and say, well, okay, reasonableness says a truck is, between 5 to 10 years. So based on the type of truck it is, if there's attachments, things like that, we say, okay, you really need to take it over 5 to 10 years. And then that's reasonable, and that's how you treat every asset, so you're consistent. Another example is one that is really outside of your control, and that's Utah retirement systems. All you know is you're told by the URS you have to contribute a certain amount of money for every employee that works for the city. Now it's their responsibility to invest that money to make sure that the pension is fully funded. Well, because it's a cost-sharing plan, if it's underfunded, then they allocate your proportionate share out to you at the end of the year, and you then record a net pension liability. You have no control over that, and if you look at the financial statements this year, it actually fully funded itself to where you have a net pension asset. So it moved from the liability section to the asset section. Now, based on markets and what's happening right now in the country and things like that, I would expect that you're gonna have a liability next year. So you can see how the estimates goes to assets, back down to liabilities, so it's this big change every year. So as a council, it's really hard to plan for the future based on historical data if you've got big swings of data. My recommendation is, especially with the URS, is to take any of those balances out of your financial records when you're trying to make financial decisions, because they really don't mean anything to the city unless everybody in the URS decided tomorrow that they're going to retire, and then all of a sudden we have to fully fund everybody's retirement. That's the only time it's ever going to be a liability or an asset to the city.
And that only at December 31.
What's that?
And that only at December 31.
Yeah, yep. So I just would say, if you're trying to plan for the future, you're looking at financial data and you're having these, swings, because what happens is it may not be a big deal on the balance sheet, whether it's on the balance sheet or liabilities, but it's also affecting your profit and loss in especially your utility funds, where they're recognizing either a pension expense or a pension benefit, depending on whether or not it's going to go to an asset or a liability. And sometimes that's significant. It might be $20, $30, $40, $50,000 that you show as an expense that really isn't a true expense.
When you talk about suggestions so far, these are things that we're not already implementing then?
As far as that suggestion, that's something that I have talked to Brant about. But as far as like any suggestions, yes, this has been communicated, and I would assume that you're probably already doing it, if that makes sense.
No. I guess what I'm saying is if it's been suggested, but we're already doing it, that doesn't make sense.
I guess for my suggestions tonight is more clarification for you as a council.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to
Yep.
make that. If you've already made the suggestion,
Yep.
maybe my next question is, Nate, have you already implemented, or are we already implementing the suggestions that have been made in the audit report?
Yes, we have. And as far as this URS GASB 68 that John's talking about now, this was a question that was raised in the audit committee meeting. Normally we record a liability, but again, with the way markets were this past year, it switched, had quite a large swing, so it's recorded as an asset. And so John's explaining that, sometimes we have these estimates. And this one with URS, it comes straight from URS. They give us the report and all the journal entries to be made. And so, yes, they are included in the report, and you'll see it in one of the notes to the financial statements. You can read into it more.
Perfect. Yeah, that was, my question was more generally, not specific
Yep.
to any specific suggestion, but as we receive suggestions in the audit report, that was my question.
Yep.
Have we already implemented them? Are we going to implement them? Or if not, some rationale. So that's more for Nate and.
Yep, and that would be a follow-up for us too, because we typically do talk about things during the audit. If we notice things that, we're not gonna report as a finding, just, hey, best practices or whatever. We'll usually try and follow up, in the next period to say, okay, were these things implemented, things like that.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
All right, significant difficulties encountered during the audit, we're just required to, if there were any difficulties, disagreements, things like that, but it wasn't anything to report. Consultations with other accountants, obviously Marcus helps the city, but if there was a question or a disagreement between the audit team or my staff and the financial staff here at the city, you're more than welcome to go out and talk to a third-party auditor. The only request is that we also are made aware that you're talking to somebody else and that we have access to that person so that we can kind of give our understanding of whatever the, issue happens to be. We can come to a consensus and then move forward. All right, findings for the year. There weren't any reportable findings either in internal control functions or state compliance findings. So no reportable findings. Other than that, is there any questions? Okay, if there are questions, feel free to reach out, love to chat. I talked to Brant for quite a bit today. We did talk about a lot of these recommendations and things like that. So Brant and Nate have my contact information. If there are questions that arise in the report, feel free to reach out. So,
Thank you.
okay.
Very much.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Nate.
Nate, do you want to add anything else for the council's benefit that you wanted to point out?
No, again, thank you, John. That was great. I appreciate all the work that you and your staff have done. But no, I don't have anything extra to add.
Guess I would make a motion that we accept the audit committee report, or the audit report as presented by the accountant.
Second?
Do we do a motion on this as a presentation?
It says it on the.
Yeah, you have to accept it.
Correct, yeah, we have to.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Okay,
I've seconded.
okay. A motion and a second. Any more discussion? Okay, we'll start with a roll call vote.
Aye?
Aye.
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 Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Moving on to business items, we have a public hearing scheduled for zone code amendments, off-street parking amendments, zoning code 12.52. Lisa?
Yes, thank you, council. We have scheduled this for a public hearing, but you have seen this item before. It was back in June of this year where we are proposing some amendments to your off-street parking ordinance. The Planning Commission did a study and held some hearings and made some recommendations on our off-street parking requirements. At the time the council heard this back in June, it was tabled. I think there was some difference of opinion on whether or not to adopt these amendments, but it was tabled and staff was given the specific direction to basically bring back some real-life examples of how these parking count amendments are going to affect some businesses and whether or not we need to make those types of amendments. And most of the controversy back in June was dealing with the parking count proposals in the parking schedule in 1252-300. So staff has not had the opportunity to do this type of analysis with the moderate income housing and also some general plan amendments and other things. And I think that was clear at the time it was tabled. So at this point, we're just requesting that the council adopt the non-controversial portion of what was proposed back in June. It's our intent to bring back the other amendments to the parking schedule, but I also don't want these important corrections and substantive amendments in the text to sort of fall through the cracks. And so we're just proposing a revised ordinance that's significantly reduced in the amendments, and I'm happy to just outline those. We're just sort of amending the language on the stacking in the drive-throughs, and I've done some calculations. I don't think we're changing anything of substance there, other than saying space and changing from 5 per lane to 216 feet and 12 spaces. I guess that adds a couple if they're double stacked. We're also proposing some amendments to the parking modification, and this is one thing that sort of started all of this proposal, because we are getting a lot of parking modification requests, which in my mind indicates that out in the real world, our parking counts aren't working, or we're seeing a lot of requests for exceptions. So, but we'd like to clear up this language in the parking modification, and I think the most substantive change that I really like is saying that, hey, if you're going to ask for a parking modification in terms of the commercial, office, and non-industrial, your required parking cannot be reduced by more than 30% of the original requirement. Because we were seeing requests for more than 50% of a modification of the original parking. And I don't know if that 30%, if we have the right number, but that was kind of the number that the Planning Commission recommended. But I think it's good to have, a maximum. I mean, at least I think 50%, but they kind of thought, let's go with 30% and see how that works. So for instance, if the parking requirement is 100 stalls, you can only request a parking modification to eliminate 30 stalls, something like that. And then the final, also more in the parking modification, just some requirements that you still have to comply with all the landscaping requirements. And again, these edits are to help staff, because when people come in and they're trying to reduce their parking, and we have to remind them, hey, you still have to comply with the internal landscaping requirements. You can't just eliminate all your parking, and what's left. Also that these parking modifications are not permitted for industrial uses for certain of these types of modifications. And then the last section is just, when we were reviewing our entire schedule, our parking schedule, some of the internal cross-references were inaccurate. We must have renumbered somewhere along the line, so all of our references to, section 060 should really be referencing 080. And so, that's just something that I think makes sense correcting. So we're recommending approval of these, and we did schedule it for another public hearing just because it's been so long, but this is considered a subsequent public hearing. I don't think these revisions are substantive because we're just eliminating some of them, and we do intend to bring those back later. So.
Questions?
I have one, Lisa. So you're saying 30%, but on the top of page 4, it says 70%.
Well, I hope I put the right ordinance in. Originally, it was 70%, so maybe you're looking at a previous version, but that was a correction that the Planning Commission caught. It did originally say 70%, and the Planning Commission recommended to flip that to, because it says shall not be reduced by more than 30% of the original. So I think that was more of the intent of staff.
So have you listed the old one? Do we have the old one and the new one then?
Yes, so I'm looking at the November 21st, 2022 version, and it does say 30%. So that's a good catch, but you might be looking at the previous version.
Right, I compared them side by side, and you do have both of them in there, so I think that the 30% is the new one.
Yeah. And hopefully I've been accurate on the changes. There's not really substantive changes other than that, and taking out all the other changes to 1252-300.
I think
Oh, okay, I see that now.
I think that the concern I had was that it's easy to, if we don't do the parking counts portion of it, I didn't want that to get lost in the discussion, because I think our planning commission spent quite a bit of time working on that. We had a study done by ESI that, where our engineer weighed in, and I'm fine with getting these language changes made and getting it accepted, but I just didn't want it to get shoved down to the bottom. So in talking with Corey today, he had mentioned maybe we need a work group session on this, and I don't think that's a bad idea to be able to maybe have Cody come and ask some questions and get a little better feel for the future thing, but maybe not put it off for too long. I know Corey hasn't had a chance to look back at it, but I do think there are some good options there that we should discuss. And
I know Gene is not cheating off my looking over because you can't read my chicken scratches, but I'll say it may be more direct for the council. We have staff that has taken a ton of time to review, research, and create presentations. Secondly, we have professional engineers that are experienced and in the field, providing us a study for which we paid for. We have a planning commission that did a lot of homework, did a number of hearings and discussion, and they recommended approval unanimously to us. We have staff, again, that recommended this for approval, that it meets our general plan. And then it comes to the council, and for some reason, I'm not saying we shouldn't just patently accept everything that's brought to us, but I think it's disingenuous when we have our staff, licensed professionals, and a unanimous planning commission that has gone to extensive effort, personally counting stalls, and they're the ones that actually receive these parking modification requests. They're the ones that deal with this. And for us to only accept a portion of it, again, I think that's a bit disrespectful. I don't disagree with Gina's comment that it would be helpful to have ESI maybe give some color and explanation, but I think there's also done a lot of work in the background. I prefer we just approve everything. I know that's not the motion tonight, but that's my personal feeling.
And my reason for bringing up maybe having Cody come in and answer some of those questions is there were some comments in June about, hey, like some of the things were more specific and there was better data that Cody was able to use, and some were a little more difficult to tell if that was the right solution or not. And so I thought it might be helpful for us to see that report. Corey and I noticed that the report was not included in our council packet in June or now. And so I thought that might be helpful for us to see that, just because, not because I 100% agree with you, that was my first concern today in approving half of this, is that it is, I don't want to do that to staff and planning commission that has spent a lot of time working on this and have taken a really deep dive on this, that, but I do think that because we had some questions about it in June about what was appropriate in each case, maybe that would help to be able to get those questions out there. But I'm really worried that we've already put this off 6 months. I don't want to see another 6 months go by.
Yeah, and if we do end up doing a work group, I think it'd be great to have a few of our planning commission members there. Give
Yeah,
their,
I would, yeah, I agree.
some color to it, but.
Yeah.
And I also agree. I'd love to have a work meeting on this. As I remember, we were okay with a lot of it, but there was a few areas
Yes.
that even staff agreed. I brought up a dentist's office that is now parking all over in a neighborhood. And so, they said where Main Street and places like that they may need to be looked at a little bit differently. And so this is something I've had a lot of residents talk to me about. And here in the older part of Centerville, it's a bigger problem. So I would love to have, and I don't want to kick it down the road too far either. I would love to have a work session on it so that we can, like I said, I agree with probably 90% of it, but I do think there's a few tweaks that need to be made. So I would love to support a work session on that.
Is it better to wait to approve this? And I mean,
No, I think you want to get it in. I think you want to implement what we've got.
what we were in
At least that
agreement with.
slows some of it and gets clarity for applicants and for planning commission and for staff.
Okay.
That's
If
my
I
personal
could just give you
feeling.
one incentive, we already have an ordinance numbered for 2022, and so if we don't adopt it, we're going to have to say delete it and then add a new one. So I would really like to get this adopted and
Okay.
at least a portion of it, and
The
then
cleanup-
we'll bring you back a new ordinance and we'll start over with the public hearing after the work session.
Okay.
Well, as a Christmas present, I think we should do it for Lisa.
Please.
Okay. Well, I'm fine,
Jennifer.
I'm
That's
fine
a
with that. I
terrible
think
Christmas
I
present,
think I was
Robin.
asking that
No.
question because I
At
wasn't
least bring it with a
sure.
plate of cookies.
I think I was asking that question because I didn't know if I was the only one that felt that way. It sounds like I'm not, that we need to get this other section reviewed, but I just wanted to make sure where everyone was at.
Yeah, and I think
I-
if the suggestion is to have a work session with the engineer, I think that's a great place to start and see if that answers some of your questions, and then maybe we can have more specific direction for staff. But if most of the questions are answered with that study, that might be helpful, and that would be easier to get it on sooner rather than later.
Okay.
I agree with that. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any additional questions?
I'm ready to vote.
Public
Right.
hearing?
Didn't know if you had
Do
any
you
words
wanna-
of wisdom.
Do you want to make a motion?
We do, We need to have a public hearing.
Yeah, open the public hearing.
we gotta open the public hearing. Can we get a motion for that?
Motion to open the public hearing?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, public hearing is open.
Somebody.
Anyone who would like to make a comment?
Make a motion to close the public hearing?
Second?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, public hearing is closed. Do you want to make a motion now?
I'm having computer problems and I don't have the number.
Okay, hang on, I can tell you.
2213,
Yeah,
Make a
it's
motion
all
that-
encapsulated in one resolution, correct?
one ordinance.
One ordinance, sorry, it's not.
Yes, in the revised ordinance.
2022.
I'd make a motion that we approve ordinance 2022-13, acknowledging that we want to revisit it and understand it's a little bit better after the first of the year, but because of circumstances in play as discussed, that it be approved tonight.
Second? If there's no other questions or
Get
discussion,
a second, did you?
I
She
did,
seconded
I
it.
seconded it.
Oh, okay. I
I'm
thought you
moving
were,
us along, Bill.
no, I see.
She's
I
Mayor
thought you
Pro
were
Tem, but
asking-
she's still a voting member, so
yeah, you're right. I apologize.
threw you off.
That's
Yep.
how I can move them along, Lisa. Are we ready for a vote? We'll start with Councilman Ince.
Aye.
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 Okay, motion passes.
Merry Christmas, Lisa.
Thank
Merry
you.
Christmas.
Robin convinced me.
Robin, I hope you bring something better.
Okay, our next item of business is a state aid agreement with UDOT for the 1250 West Multi-Use Trail. Kevin, are you presenting on that?
As Corey wants to. Yeah, I think I could give a short summary of basically of the project, but a year or so ago, we applied for some trails monies. This is a project that we've applied for in the past, WFRC, under the TAP program. Then we tried this other TIF program with UDOT. So this is actually state money. It's not federal money, but it's money towards a trail, a multi-use trail, 10 feet wide on the west side of 1250 West from Parish Lane to 1175 North. So again, just from Parish, it goes north up over the bridge. There's sidewalk, concrete sidewalk along the bridge already, about 10 feet wide.
And when you talk about multi-use trail, I'm thinking of, in this context, it's probably like a UDOT trail, which is a 10-foot sidewalk. That's
This-
another,
This will be 10 feet of asphalt pavement, so
Okay.
it'll be similar to the Maverick Trail that's
behind curb, top, back, and curb.
behind back of curb. They like these 10-foot wide trails because you can pass easily with a bike, stroller, anybody that like to try to get down to the Legacy Trail. So this will in essence connect Parish Lane to the Legacy Trail there at 1175 North. The funding on it is, I believe, 60% and a 40% match. The estimate on it is about $700,000. And so, yeah, we feel like this is a worthwhile project. It's one that's been on the master plan for some time as far as trails are concerned. And when we were out there in the walkthrough with this was in the past with WFRC, they didn't end up funding the project, but there were several folks that they'd come down and they don't like to cross Parish Lane to go down the side of Maverick to get to Legacy. If they're heading north, we watch several people, they just take that right and they go down 1250 West and they drive in the road on their bike, or, you know, there was one mom with a couple of kids that was wanting to get down to the trail. So again, this would allow them to be off the road, have their own multi-use trail. That's basically the scope of the project. There's some utilities and trees that we're going to be trying to miss, so the cross-section is going to vary. There might be times where the 10-foot trail is right up against the back of the curb, and then there might be times where we have several feet of park strip. So it's very conceptual right now in the design, but
Is 1250 a UDOT road, Kevin, or is it a city road?
it's a city street.
And is the trail, I didn't see, I was looking for a plan. I don't know if we had a plan in the packet. I didn't see one. But
We
it's,
basically had a cross-section is what we submitted, and I don't know if it got in the packet, but there's basically a cross-section that was submitted for the,
is it within our right-of-way then, I assume?
it's within our right-of-way. We have an 80-foot right-of-way, so we have a lot of room back.
With, okay.
Yes.
That's what I didn't know. If you're adding a 10-foot trail, did we already have that right-of-way or not? So.
Yes, one reason we conceptually selected the west side was that the sidewalk over the bridge is on the west side. There may be some wetlands down close to where Hogan Construction is on the west side of the road that we may have to deal with. But that's the basic concept of the project that's been granted by the state.
Kevin, is this one of the grants that we were talking about last week when we had the UDOT I-15 EIS discussion?
Yes, this is one that was brought up. Another one that was brought up is there's funding to go underneath the Legacy Bridge along the south side of Parish Lane. So where the Maverick Trail jogs back to the south, there's also a grant in place that it's a couple years out, but it's to go underneath the Legacy Bridge and put a break in that barrier so that you can connect right to the Legacy Trail at that point. Right now, I haven't seen anybody, but I hear that there's folks that'll drive down there and jump the barrier with their bike. You know, they'll have to hoist their bike over the barrier, but
Donna?
yeah, okay, there you go. So that's another connection, and that's, again, maybe a few years away.
Okay. Any other questions? I do have one question, probably Brant or Nate, if he's still on. Do we have to come up with 40% of the cost share. Did we budget that in this year?
Sorry. Thanks for accommodating me being on Zoom in my office. This is really weird. So yes, we're talking about, there's various options here. It's in front of the Wright development property, so there could be some RDA increment. It's a transportation project, so we could be using the transportation funds to pay for this, or worst case scenario, Fund 47. So no, we did not budget for this project officially, but there are funds available. Three options to pay for this.
Okay.
Jake, did I miss anything?
Well, this
heard
is a project that maybe by the time,
What's the timing on the project?
the timing would be, you know, maybe you would design in the winter and spring. You could wait another year if we could check with UDOT and see if they would hold the funding.
Design this winter and spring, bid it out, it would be maybe part of next year's budget cycle.
Yes, much of the funds I do think could be incorporated into next year's budget cycle.
Outside of design fees.
Yeah, I would recommend that you at least receive bids in the spring. I wouldn't wait until the summer so that you get, or again, the idea might be to ask UDOT if you can put it off for a year.
They'll only hold those bids for 10 or 15 days.
Well, you wouldn't go out to bid, but you would just ask UDOT if you could bid the following spring.
Yeah, okay.
If they would,
And maintain the grant money.
yes, that's an idea that they might go for, but
other questions or comments?
I would recommend that we approve. I don't know, it's just a recommendation. I don't know that it's a motion, Lisa, correct?
We do want you to approve the agreement.
Correct.
Okay,
So I'd recommend we approve the UDOT state aid agreement for this 10-foot multi-use trail along 1250 West between Parish and Legacy.
Second.
okay. We have a motion. Any other discussion? Okay, we'll start with Councilman Yance.
Aye.
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 Okay, motion passes. Thank you, Kevin. Our next item of business is to approve the annual meeting schedule for City Council next year. This is a resolution. Is someone presenting on this?
It's a calendar.
Well,
Do we need a presentation or are we
yeah,
good?
just
It
mention
says
one,
Jennifer's name there.
yeah, just mention one thing that, so we are required by law, if we meet regularly under the Open Meetings Act, to adopt our annual schedule. There are two meetings that we have revised. One is July 4th, so we're proposing the July 5th. Now, hopefully we can cancel that or, anyway, but we're
That was my
suggesting.
question to you and Jennifer, is probably you just put them as place markers, and
Yeah,
then
we
at
had-
least it's on the record, and we
Right,
can
we
make
had that
adjustments
debate
as needed.
internally, and yeah, I think that was
Okay.
our conclusion, is let's put
Okay.
it on there so we can have it if you want to, but if we don't, then we'll just post it that it's been canceled. And then the other one is the election day. This will be a municipal election year, and in the past few years, we have not held the city council meeting on general election night. So we've moved that one to Monday because the Wednesday is a planning commission meeting.
Okay.
Because it's a back-to-back week, kind of an odd week, given the
The
second,
timing.
The way the
second
calendar works.
Wednesday. And then I did also notice that, I think that the primary falls in August on our meeting night, but we have not historically revised our meeting schedule for the primary, and I don't suggest we do,
Okay,
given the vote by mail and things like that.
that was very helpful. Any questions or comments?
Make a motion to approve the calendar as presented.
Second?
Okay, so we do a roll call vote on this one.
You can just,
We'll
Not
do a roll
financial.
call vote, we'll just be safe. Go ahead, Councilman.
Aye.
Yates.
Aye.
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 Okay, motion passes. Summary actions, bond reduction for the Jewel Creek Place subdivision. Do we do a report on this, or can we just make a motion?
summary action, you can just make a motion if you'd like,
Are
but
we
if you
ready?
have any questions,
Can
Kevin
somebody
can.
just remind me where Dual Creek Place is at?
This is the one that I believe the county, their property on 200
200
South,
South, kind of up east of.
next to the Lee Scablin Wildland Park,
Yes.
opposite that.
On the other
They did
side.
3 lots there,
Okay. Oh, on the south,
have-
on the
yeah.
south side.
right? And
Yes.
they've already sold
Yes.
it to
Okay.
another party, maybe Symphony.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve bond reduction number 2 and end of warranty for Dual Creek Place subdivision in the amount of $5,450.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. I think that concludes, we have minutes to approve. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes? If not, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes. Do you need me to list the dates, Jennifer? Or just,
Yeah, probably.
okay.
List all of
For the
them.
closed session on November 1st, work session on November 15th, city council on November 15th, and closed session on November 15th, as well as our special city council meeting last week.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Councilwoman Meekum, do you want to do a council report? Is she there?
She's muted.
Okay, I'm here, sorry. Aye.
Oh.
Whatever. My Bluetooth died, so I lost you for a minute.
That was the best comment of the night.
Gina's,
That was for the motion to adjourn?
no, Gina's so nice. She was asking for your council report, Robin.
I.
Is that A-Y-E or I?
Yeah, sorry about that. I always like to liven things up, you know. So we still have not met as a landmarks committee. We're hoping now we've got the new employee down in public, in Corey's department, that after the first of the year, we'll be able to get the landmarks committee back up and going again. The Utopia, we had a special meeting where they're wanting to redo the bonds. Brant can probably explain this better than I can. I was very worried about what they were trying to do. I didn't want it to be able to come back on the city or affect us in any way. So I went to Brant. Brant called and talked to them, and they've explained to Brant that actually when interest rates are higher, it's a benefit for them to redo the bonds than when they're lower. And so we gave them permission that when they get at a certain point, they're going to redo them because that would be to a benefit to us. The other good news is they are doing well, and we will be getting a larger refund this year than we got last year. Maybe Brant wants to add to that.
Yes, Councilmember, happy to touch on that as well. I had a great conversation with Roger Timmerman, just asking about this refunding. So it is refunding of our current bonds that I believe expire 2042. And so of course my concerns were, are we issuing new bonds, and is our payment going to be a decrease, but are we paying more money in interest overall? And he said, no, that's not the case. When they set up the bonds initially, it was set up under, oh, Nate, I can't remember the term used, but it's really not a great structure that the bonds are currently set up under. And there's an opportunity now to refund those bonds, and they'll actually collect a refund of, and Robin, it's been already a few weeks, so I don't have my notes. There'll be potentially a refund of $3 or $4 million by refunding these bonds. Our payments stay the same across the board, but there's $3 to $4 million that Utopia could collect. And with that, the intent from Roger is to reinvest those funds back into Utopia to create more revenue for Utopia that would help pay off the bonds quicker. I asked him if they did consider whether it's a refund to all of the original cities of that amount. He said, yes, we considered it, but it's kind of a short-term benefit and not really long-term for Utopia. And I asked him, well, then what about, reducing our payments over the course of this time with Utopia to 2042? He said, again, same argument. It's a short-term benefit. I don't necessarily want to speak out of turn here, but I feel it's important to share with you some of the intricacies of this conversation with Roger, that there's an opportunity to see Utopias paying a lot more of the bond payment than they have in the past. So you're seeing our bond payments going down, about staying the same, not necessarily going down drastically. But this is the first year that Utopia actually has paid 25% of the bond. In previous years, it's only been around 10%. So you're already seeing Utopia being able to pay a larger portion of the bond payments. The way it's set up, though, is we pay our bond because we're the ones that you're on the hook for the bond payments, and then we're reimbursed by Utopia. There is some hope from Roger that in the next 7 to 10 years that Utopia could be paying 100% of the bond. And I think that's great, and I think it's optimistic. I'm a little skeptical, of course, but I like what he's saying. And I like that he has that's the objective, is that Utopia be making 100% of the bond payment in 7 to 10 years. But with that, he also shared that once the bond is paid off, he believes there's still a liability to the original city. So we've made bond payments. I don't know to the tune of how much, Nate. It'd be interesting to see how much we've paid in bond payments over the years. But he believes that once Utopia has paid off the bond, that we could continue that revenue being generated by Utopia could be reimbursing the original cities for their original debt. Again, like what he's saying, and I appreciate the conversation with him. And I asked him just to put it in memo form, some sort of documentation to us and other cities, so we can all be on the same page and have it in writing what his objectives are going forward. Or I should say Utopia's, not necessarily his, but. Anyway, is that okay, Councilmember Meekum? Did I address
Yes,
the need
yes,
of it?
and I appreciated Brent very much calling, and like I said, I was really concerned, and I'm not a bond expert, and from what it was sounding like to me, I was panicking, and so I was pleased that, Brent called and got more information, and
Happy to do so.
Hey, Robin, this is Spencer. I just had a quick question, back to landmarks. When we had Whitaker as part of our work session, we talked about landmarks not being really functioning, and we talked about maybe consolidating landmarks with Whitaker, and I thought we approved that.
no, we talked about that, and it wasn't approved, and so the mayor called some new members for the landmark, and we have it fully staffed now. He's just called new mayors, or new members.
Okay, that wasn't my recollection, but that's fine.
Is that everything, Council?
That's all I have.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. We'll defer the mayor's report until he is with us next time. Brent, do you have items for us?
I just have one item. Thanks, Councilmember Hurst. This is, in the next couple of months, I can't really give a definite timeline, but we'll be revisiting the moderate income housing report that we just submitted to the state. The five items we had selected was great and all, but they rejected our report, stating that we didn't necessarily benchmark our results well enough. So Corey and I have been working on this and discussing how to proceed going forward. Don't know if this is good news or bad news, but 66 out of the 81 cities failed their reports. We'll all have to redo the report. So obviously, we're not on the same page with what the state is expecting for this report. So we had a conference call with a bunch of city managers and community development directors and planners with the league as well as Department of Workforce Services to find a way to understand what the deficiencies are and how we can correct them, because obviously we're not on the same page. So we have until February I believe it's February. Lisa, I don't know if you involved in this at all, but I believe February to cure this. No, they extended it out. I'm sorry. I'll have to get back to you on a date. But we do have to cure and come back to them and resubmit our report with more concrete benchmark or objectives and goals and realistic goals that they will accept. So we're looking at, instead of having the 5, going back to the 3 and having a little bit more realistic timelines. Both Corey and I are very frustrated with the process. The state has their position and they're going to stick to it, and they're just trying to enforce the rules that were created by the state legislature. It looks like we're going to be looking at some legislation running this next year to try and clarify and clean up that language and make it easier to understand and more clearly defined expectations of us as cities and what they're looking for in the moderate income housing report. So we're going to have a redo of the moderate income housing report. Any questions?
What's that going to look like workload for Corey?
I think it's
It's going to be a little bit of work.
Yeah, it's already scheduled for I believe we're trying to get it on the next planning commission meeting in December, on December 14th, because we only have one planning commission meeting and then try to get it to the council in January. I'm glad to hear they pushed back, because I think initially it was a February date, but with all the noticing requirements for general plan amendments, in my opinion, it wasn't realistic, but we're still trying to meet that and get it to you sometime in January or February, I guess.
And that's all I have unless there's questions for me.
Brant, do they give you any indication of what they think is an acceptable?
Yeah, so the letter we received from Department of Workforce Services is pretty clear on what their expectations are, but it's just different than what was being shared over the last year of what those expectations were being. We more thought, look, we just need you to do some things and have some objectives in mind, but I mean, we just struggle when you say we're going to allow higher density zoning, so you have a single family, we're going to allow it to be multifamily. How do you benchmark that? After you rezone it to multifamily, what other goals or objectives do you need to have associated with that, since you've already created the opportunity? And it almost felt as if we're supposed to be actively engaged in encouraging the developer to increase the multifamily zoning and be a little bit more involved, you know, more micromanaging a development. And so that's where Corey and I are a little frustrated, where we aren't going to dictate what the developer should or shouldn't do with their property. We can create the zone, but are we supposed to be incentivizing financially? That's where we're getting a little frustrated. Once we rezone, we've created that opportunity. We're not going to build the homes. So that just gives you an example of one of the frustrations that we're just trying to help figure out. We're just trying to spend some time to figure out what those goals would be, realistic goals would be that are achievable. Does that answer your question, Councilmember Rance?
Probably as much as you can. I'm concerned that they have set out an unachievable goal. And they don't care, they're just pushing it downstream.
I think this would be a great topic when we meet with our representatives. And the plan is the first meeting in January, I believe, is what the mayor is trying to coordinate. And I believe this is one of those items that we should be discussing.
Makes a lot of sense, I agree.
Any other questions?
Where are we about December 20?
Oh, that's a great question. As of right now, we do have at least one council member out of town that I'm aware of. We do have a staff member that's going to be out of town, but at this time, and we still hold it. We don't necessarily have any business scheduled for the 20th, but if we need to, there could be some items we could discuss. It'd more likely be a short agenda. So, Councilmember Hurst, I'll defer to you.
Okay. Motion to adjourn? I think we're,
So we're still tentatively planning to meet on the 20th?
sounds like,
It sounds like it's a little bit up in the air.
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, Councilmember Rance, if you're needing an answer now, because you
No,
want to
I
make
just
plans, you're welcome to make a motion, any of you. But as far as business, all the business items we have as of now can wait until the beginning of January. So if council is wanting to hold one, it's up to you at this point.
I'm the one that's out of town, so I'll let you guys
Okay,
decide.
so you-
I'm not going to be here.
And I could join, but remotely, so.
Robin?
If we don't have business, I don't see a reason in holding it. If we want to wait until it's closer to see if anything comes up, or, I'm up either way.
I am not leaving town, so I don't have a problem coming. There's no point in, I guess the biggest reason I have to come that night is I didn't bring any gifts for other council members tonight. That's a pretty poor reason to have a meeting.
I was asking Lisa, I know on the planning commission, they at least warned me that there was gifts that would be brought, and I didn't want to show up with them if nobody else did. Didn't
I was
wanna-
in the
Didn't
same-
want to bring them if,
They're-
vice versa. so.
There generally are.
But it sounds like.
But nobody did
It sounds like
tonight, so-
Robin's got a gift that she's got to give in addition to Lisa at least.
That's right.
So you could take the year off, you know. Just for you guys, you know.
Well, let's just leave it tentative. I don't, there's no point in meeting if there's nothing to be accomplished.
It's gotta be a really good
But I'd be
meeting
glad to come
to
and say Merry
actually
Christmas to
schedule.
everyone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, make a motion
Correct.
to adjourn the meeting.
Second?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.